Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about consciousness. Now, states of consciousness is a relatively short unit in AP psychology, but there are quite a few important things that happen in this unit. So let's go ahead and dive in. Know that when we're talking about states of consciousness, we are essentially discussing the awareness that you have of yourself and your environment. And throughout any particular day, you often experience different states of consciousness. Like you have a state of consciousness right now, and hopefully you are awake, you are alert, you're taking your AP psychology notes. So we would say that you have, you're well aware of yourself and your surroundings. Whereas maybe as the day goes on, you're getting a little tired or sleepy. Maybe you start to daydream and you're just kind of staring off into nothingness, right? We would say it's a different state of consciousness. Tonight, when you go to sleep and you go into deep sleep, and then maybe you, as you're transitioning throughout the different sleep cycles, which we'll talk about here in a moment, then you start to dream. These again are other states of consciousness. If you go get your wisdom teeth taken out and they give you some heavy medications and now you're feeling kind of funky, well, that's another state of consciousness. So, consciousness is simply your awareness of yourself and your surroundings. And a big part of your consciousness is dictated by what we call your circadian rhythms. And a circadian rhythm is, you can think of it as your internal biological clock. And it is these periods of wakefulness and sleepiness, your energy levels throughout the day. You wake up, and usually about an hour or so after you wake up, you feel pretty energized. And then that dips a little bit before lunch. And then after lunch, you feel energized again. And then it dips a little bit in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden, you got a bunch of energy at 8 or 9 p.m. when you're thinking, I should probably go into bed. And then you fall asleep, and then you sleep for 6 or 7 hours, right? So, this cycle of energy throughout the day, and it lasts about 24 hours, is what we call your circadian rhythm. And the more in sync you are with your circadian rhythm, the more likely you are to wake up at about the same time every day, fall asleep at about the same time every night. Let's say you set your alarm to wake up for 6 a.m. Well, don't be surprised if at 5:58 you're waking up all the time and you're looking at your phone and you're thinking, "Ugh, I've got 2 more minutes of sleep." Right? If you're always waking up before your alarm, right before your alarm, we'd say you're in tune with your circadian rhythm, your internal biological clock that kind of measures these cycles of energy throughout the day. Now, as far as cognitively speaking, with consciousness, and again, we're talking about your awareness, some things require what we call a conscious serial track of processing, right? Conscious processing are things that you have to be thinking about. Your ability to solve certain problems. I have there defining a particular word, right? If you're consciously thinking about something, you really can only consciously think about one thing at a time. And we discussed this to an extent when we talked about memory, and you can think of your working memory. Well, what is it that you're consciously thinking about right now? But you can multitask with lots of unconscious things. So our mind will allow us to run a parallel track of unconscious things. My ability to walk around, my ability to interpret different things that I see, that doesn't require my conscious awareness. So, as we continue this conversation about consciousness and our awareness of ourselves and our surroundings, some of that requires conscious processing and some of it requires unconscious processing. Just kind of a weird thing to think about. I have an example on here, this bird. Well, if you look up in the sky and you see a bird flying, you have lots of different information flying down these parallel tracks. You can see the motion of the bird, the form, the depth, the speed, the movement. And then you put it all together and you see a bird. You don't think about all of these different aspects separately, right? They happen on these parallel tracks. Um, when we are thinking about one of the biggest influences on our awareness and how consciously aware we are of ourselves and of our surroundings, well, the one thing that happens every single day is when we go to bed and we fall asleep. And so, one of the biggest influences on our consciousness is our sleep cycle. Not to be confused with your circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm is about a 24-hour biological clock. Your sleep cycle, however, is hopefully around 8 or 9 hours a night. Some of you are probably getting less sleep than that. But what you have in front of you is a typical night's sleep. if you are getting a healthy amount of sleep. And so you may want to pause and kind of jot this chart down in your notes, or you might want to print it off in your notes. Recognize that there's a lot of things happening in this chart that you want to make sure that you get. So I'm going to say a lot of things that are not being displayed on the screen, and I want to make sure that you get that. So if we look at this typical night's sleep, when you are above this line, we would say you're awake. And while you're awake, you're alert, you're looking around, your brain is firing quickly. It's operating very quickly. And we can tell this through an electroencephalogram, what we call an EEG. And we've talked about those before. And your brain is producing what are called beta waves. They're these short, rapid waves because you're processing a ton of information. And then when you do start to drift into sleep, then those beta waves transition into what we call alpha waves, which are a little bit slower, and then into theta waves. And theta waves are what are present in what we call NREM1 sleep, which stands for non rapid eye movement stage 1 sleep. And there's a couple different things that are happening in NREM1. The big thing to know is that for the most part, your body is slowing down. Your heart rate is going to start to slow. Your breathing is going to deepen. You're not processing as much information. So your brain waves are starting to become longer and more spread out with these theta waves. And you're going to spend about 10, 15 minutes or so in the NREM1 stage. You'll then transition into NREM2. And again, things are slowing down. The heart rate's slowing. The breathing is deepening. It's just a deeper state of sleep. You can see if you think of this almost as a pool or an ocean, when you're in NREM1 and then going down into NREM2, you're getting further away from the surface of when you would normally be awake. So it's more difficult to wake you up when you're in this kind of middle stage of sleep. And when you are in REM2, recognize that you're going to spend most of the night in that particular stage because you'll hit that stage when you're going down and then you'll hit it again when you're coming back up, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. So you'll spend 10, 15 minutes in REM2, and then you will go into in REM3. Now, your textbook discusses in REM4, what we sometimes call stage 4 sleep. It's a little out of date. Within the last few years, psychologists have kind of started combining stage 3 and stage 4 sleep. You will not need to differentiate between stage 3 and stage 4. We, for the most part, just say stage 3 at this point. So in REM3, this is your deepest sleep that you'll experience throughout the night. Very, very deep sleep. And during this time, your brain produces what are called delta waves. They're these long, drawn out brain waves because you don't have to process a lot of information. Your heart is beating the slowest it will beat throughout the entire day. Your breath is very, very slow and deep. Now, there are some things that kind of pick up in this stage. Cell reproduction, for example, happens rapidly in deep sleep, in this stage 3 sleep. In addition, this is when we tend to secrete a lot of our growth hormone. So, deep sleep is great for our body. It helps our body kind of recover and recuperate from the day. If you're an athlete and you spend a lot of time working out and lifting weights and going on runs and things like that, you may spend more time in deep sleep than perhaps one of your classmates because you need that time in the stage 3, NREM3, recovering from the day's workout. And then after you spend about 20 minutes or so in NREM3, what happens is you start to climb your way out of this deep sleep. And you go from stage 3 to stage 2, spend about 10, 15 minutes in stage 2. Then you go back into stage 1, 10 or 15 minutes into stage 1. And then you hit a fourth stage, which is different. And it's what we call REM sleep or REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. And students sometimes get confused about this pattern. You have to remember you go down from 1, 2, 3, then you climb back up to 2, and then 1, and then you hit REM sleep. And REM sleep is different from all of the non REM sleep. What happens in REM sleep is lots of crazy things. So, first of all, your heart rate speeds up quite a bit. Your breathing becomes shallow and irregular. Your brain waves start looking like beta waves. They start processing information as if you are awake. Your body, physiologically speaking, looks as if you are awake, but you're not awake, you're dreaming. So it's during this REM sleep that you have these really vivid dreams. And another really fascinating thing that happens during REM sleep is that your muscles become completely relaxed. In fact, the kind of top of your brain stem is going to release this chemical that paralyzes your peripheral nervous system. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not going to paralyze your peripheral nervous system. It's going to paralyze a certain part of your peripheral nervous system, your somatic nervous system, which remember, are the voluntary muscles. And that's really good because if you're having a very vivid dream, we want to make sure that you don't act out that dream because you might end up hurting yourself, right? And so you might think, well, what about sleepwalking, right? Well, the reality is sleepwalking doesn't happen in REM sleep. Sleepwalking, sleep talking, that happens in deep sleep in NREM3, which means you're not acting out a dream if you're sleepwalking. So you have this REM sleep, which takes honestly just a couple of minutes the first time you experience it. And then you start the cycle over again. You start to go into NREM1, then 2, then 3, and then back up. One trip down and back up to REM is what we call an ultradian cycle. And it takes about 90 minutes or so. And so throughout a night, you will likely have 4 or 5 ultradian cycles. And you can see them when they go down and they come back up. You go down and you come back up. And you'll also notice that throughout the night, the ultradian cycles look a little bit different. The first couple times, you're going to get a lot of rich, deep sleep to help your body recover. And you're not going to spend a lot of time in REM sleep. But as the night progresses, you will spend less and less time in deep sleep and more time in very light sleep and REM sleep. So this slide kind of shows you what these brain waves may look like, and you can maybe try to sketch something similar. But you'll notice that from stage 1, 2, 3, your brain waves get slower and slower and more drawn out. From stage 1, which has a few what we call alpha waves and theta waves, all the way down to stage 3, which are delta waves. You remember deep sleep delta waves. So why is it important that we sleep? Well, I'm not going to go through all these specifically because you can read them and they're pretty self-explanatory if you want to hit pause here. But sleep is incredibly important for our survival. It protects us. It allows our body to recover. There's some cognitive benefits. We know, for example, that if you study before you go to bed, you are actually more likely to encode that information and remember it the next day. We know that sleep helps with our ability to think critically and problem solve. If you've ever been sleep deprived, you know how we sometimes make silly mistakes. It's because our brain hasn't had time to recuperate. And so we can't think correctly. We have a hard time solving problems. It's why it's so important you get a lot of good sleep before you have a big test. You may think staying up late and studying is going to help you in cramming all this information, but if you're sleep deprived, you're not going to be able to solve even the most simple problems. And if you are sleep deprived, there's all kinds of risks that we can have. And again, I won't go through each of these. You can pause the video and kind of read through them yourself. But you can see that not getting enough sleep puts a lot of pressure on your body. And there are very serious physical problems that can take place if you don't get enough sleep. Things like increased blood pressure, which can lead to heart attacks. You can have, the formation of ulcers. You can have a reduction in muscle tone. So it's important that we get that sleep. So that's it for today. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. And as always, good luck.